to do something really exciting. So this is all about AI in the trenches and helping all of you to get your apps to production, to build resilient and reliable AI systems, and to really get things working. Now, I'll start out with a little statistic. So who here trusts analyst firms like Gartner? Yeah. No hands? What's going on here? No.
So much for your opener.
Yeah, that's going to flop. Okay, let's try this again. Who trusts analysts when they predict colossal failure? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. So we got some hands up finally. And Gartner actually predicts by the end of 2025, 30% of Gen AI projects are going to fail.
That's it?
All right, so that's a lot. And I don't want any of you in the room here to be part of that 30%. So we have an amazing set of panelists, and let's introduce them and let's kick off this panel. So why don't you go first, Mark?
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Mark Richards. I'm an independent consultant, hands-on software architect, author, and also the founder of developer2architect.com, a website I host with lots of resources and lessons. I've been in the industry for, a very long time. I won't mention the number of decades. Doesn't have double digits yet, but getting close. And I've been involved in AI since about 1.5 years now. So doesn't sound like a lot. It's kind of embarrassing, but it hasn't been around that long. So I'm not.
You're an early adopter.
I'm an early adopter. Yes, exactly. Anyways, you know what? Actually, let me back that up. I've been involved in AI since the late 90s. And you'll see how I've been involved in AI since the late 90s in my keynote on Thursday. Yes.
That was a good pitch.
There we go. Well, that's why we're here, right? For shameless plugs on our talks. Wait, you mean that's not what the panel's for? Oh.
All right.
Yeah, it's hard to follow, but I'm Archie Sharma. I'm the CEO here at ZenCoder. We are developing the best AI coding agent in the market. We've been around, new kids on the block, only a year. But my prior journey has been with scaling a company called Rike, WRIKE. I scaled it to 250 million, sold it to Citrix for like 2.25 billion. And with the founder of Rike now, this is our second journey together with ZenCoder. And been in software for 20 years, was a principal engineer back in my engineering days at Western Digital, the hard drive SSD maker, and been in the industry for a while. So glad to be here and this is my first time at Git, so super excited to be here, and it's a wonderful meeting.
Probably not your last.
Yeah, definitely not my last. But
okay, Vanya.
Awesome, thank you so much. Hi everyone, I'm Vanya. I'm the head of tech for ThoughtWorks in India and Middle East. I think I'm supposed to say that Middle East word as well. In particular, I'm also part of the Doppler group at ThoughtWorks, which puts together, I'm sure a lot of you are avid readers of that, which is the ThoughtWorks Technology Radar. And I consult our customers across people, process, and tech transformations. Most recently, I've been focusing a lot more on AI, specifically AI for software delivery and also AI-powered systems. I'm really happy to be here.
And my name is Michael Carducci. I like to call myself a holistic software architect because so often what I'm doing is not directly related to architecture, but at the same time, I try to solve the whole problem and not just a sliver of the problem. And the actual architecture of a system is just part of the problem. I've been involved with kind of data-driven and AI-enabled systems for about 15 years. One of the big projects I worked on started in 2020, and that got us access to GPT-3 about a little over a year ahead of the mainstream. Before ChatGPT became a thing, we were using GPT-3 and doing cool things with it. But about 15 years in this space on and off. I definitely don't see myself as an expert because it is such a vast field. How can one be an expert? I'm the author of Mastering Software Architecture, which I think they were talking about up at the A-Press booth. And I am also really excited to be here with you.
All right, awesome. So you can see we have a really, really strong panel. Big round of applause. Now, I kind of seeded this a little bit with my intro, but I think we have exactly the right people to tell us how we can succeed in our AI projects, but that's not how we're going to start this panel. So each of you, your hot take, 1 minute. How can you make your AI project spectacularly fail? All right, so.
Trust it. But since I have a minute, I'll take another 45 seconds and basically say this level of trust in terms of the non-deterministic nature of most AI-enabled systems. There are certain aspects and certain agents, which I'm sure you're going to talk about, which I hope you do, that are somewhat deterministic we can trust. But in general, I think this is going to be an ongoing theme you're going to see, especially from some of my answers in terms of trust.
Yeah, I'll actually double down on that point. Like, I think if you think that like your AI agent will be the autonomous kind of coding agent or your autonomous marketing agent or sales or voice or whatever that autonomous looks like, I think it's years away. So you should not trust the agent. The human in the loop is very important, and it is going to be around for the longest time. I think that's just, yeah, I'll stop here.
Awesome. What's a spectacular failure, right? One example in my head is that you put an AI system in the hands of your customers and then they start hating it. They stop trusting it, right? Like that in my head is a spectacular failure. And there's one story, like some small trivia. I was recently reading an article about how Cursor responded to some, Reddit thread on the policy that never existed, right? So AI is trying to be helpful all the time, right? So it will make up some things called as confabulations or hallucinations, like which is also alluding to the trust factor. But one thing that you can really do to miserably fail in production is not think enough about the guardrails that you want to put in your AI systems, because they are going to hallucinate because the AI wants to help, right? So without the guardrails, you are surely heading towards a failure. Spectacular one, that too.
And for me, I think the easiest way to fail with AI is to try to AI all the things. So certainly for very, very simple, well-constrained tasks, you take a generative model and you ask it a question, give me a paragraph about something, or as Venkat was saying, write me a paragraph about Mark Richards, and then I can validate that against Mark Richards. And what we've seen with generative AI is it has a broad set of zero-shot capabilities. In other words, the latest and most advanced models, you give them a challenge, you give them a problem, and it seems to be able to solve them. And so what we're doing with that is we're over-ascribing the capabilities of these models, and we're overusing and over-deploying AI in a lot of cases. So I think the easiest way to make an AI project fail is very simply to try to use it for everything. Try to make it into your universal silver bullet magic tool. I think it works in well-defined domains, but when we try to AI everything, you're giving yourself a recipe for failure.
No, that's a challenge. Because my boss, his daughter wrote a poem with an AI. AI can do anything, right?
There was a really great example that I learned from Brian Sletton. There was a musician, and for jet lag reasons, I'm completely blanking on his name. Nick Caves. And so what this person did, a fan of the musician Nick Caves, he said to ChatGPT, or one of these models, I don't know which, said, write a song in the style of Nick Cave. And he sent it to Nick Cave as, he's like, what do you think about this? And do you know what his response was? It sucks. And then he writes this beautiful essay. Go find this. Nick Cave has some incredible writing, and I highly encourage you look into this, even if that's not your style of music. But he talks about what art is supposed to be and how we've eliminated the soul of this. And in fact, I've had long conversations with Brian Sletton on this topic. And he said that I now believe in the concept of a soul because I've seen art created without one.
Well, so I'm going to have, that's pretty good. I'm going to have to actually quote Marge Simpson from The Simpsons, who said to Homer, "I didn't say you couldn't deep fry your shirt. I said you shouldn't deep fry your shirt." So
I'm embarrassed that you beat me on a Simpsons reference.
that was my whole goal of the panel, my friend. Yes.
Okay, so let's double down on business value for a sec, because I think that's a key point. If you're not able to build an application which provides business value, which actually solves real world problems, it doesn't matter if you get to production, you're not going to be successful with your customers. You're not going to have a successful project. Actually, that was the primary reason for the prediction Gartner had for 30% of projects failing, was not meeting the business value and the stakeholder requirements. So how can, like, as a software engineer who's stuck in a world where everyone thinks AI is the silver bullet, it's going to solve all problems, how can you navigate this to success?
Yeah, I think we have to stop thinking about AI as a silver bullet, because it is not, right? Right now, what's happening is FOMO, fear of missing out. And therefore, it has become a boardroom conversation where the board members or the CTOs or the CEOs of the organizations, they want to look cool. They want to look that they're doing the latest stuff. And that is leading to a lot of investment in this area, but then that's not actually returning that return on investment, because it's just eyewash, right? It's just marketing speak. If there is a ChatGPT based API that I'm invoking behind the scenes, I'm called an AI startup, and that's probably selling. I think one of the ways I believe that we have to think about actually achieving something useful and valuable with AI is to look at it from what's your business strategy, right? What's your direction that your business is taking? And what are those components where you believe that data and AI can add real value, right? The way you would approach building any other traditional software system, you have to give the same thought, the same rigor to building an AI and data-driven system as well, because if you're not putting that thought, that means you're just doing the thing for the fear of missing out and not actually adding any value to the table.
Okay, and I think something you said is important. So when you referred to AI systems, you said AI and data systems. So maybe clarify why you're putting those concepts together.
Absolutely, because your AI is as good as the data that you train it on. And if you're not investing in a solid, robust data platform ecosystem where you're gathering your enterprise data, curating it, and monitoring the data quality, and investing in right data products such that you can fuel your AI systems with the right enterprise data, which gives you that competitive advantage, you're not actually leveraging AI, right? So I would say that your use cases, your strategy has to go via the entire value chain of how you're procuring data and what sort of business problems you want to solve, and how do you want to really release these systems in front of your customers such that they can actually use them safely in an ethical fashion and also responsibility.
And I want to reflect your question back to you, Stephen. Define value. To quote Peter Drucker, you can't improve what you don't measure. And I think that's the craziest thing about all of this, is that we're expecting value, we're demanding value, but we're not measuring value, we're not defining value, because value is subjective. And so I think if we're trying to connect this to business value, then we have to understand what that means. For the folks here, how many of you know what your organizational KPIs are? What are we measuring? What matters? And how is that influencing the software that we build? And a lot of times as engineers, we don't know. We don't pay attention to that. It's a business problem. And there are no business problems and technology problems, because we're all on the same team. We're all trying to deliver on the same goals. And that means that, especially as you move up the value chain in the organization, because not caring about any of that stuff, that's the job of a coder. And guess what? If your job is just writing code, that is probably not going to be a job for much longer. But if you are, as our panelists have said, you are driving that, and you are the human driver using these tools to augment the value that you deliver. You can only deliver value when you know what that is.
I think, Vanya, you hit the nail on the head. Fear of missing out, FOMO. Why do we keep doing this. I've been around for a very, very long time. Not quite a dinosaur yet. Oh, I'll never be a dinosaur, Venkat, wherever you are. But those of you who have hair the color of mine remember the service-oriented architecture days of the, early 2000s, and how all of a sudden SOA became a silver bullet. As a matter of fact, it probably claims that it cured cancer, I'm sure.
And MCP is trying to bring back the wisdom.
And there you go. So what happened was businesses said, why aren't we doing this? And, George Santayana was right. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I stand back and I see the same thing. We are at an age right now in AI of experimentation and beginning that enlightenment of saying, well, there's a lot of things we can do. And I'm very excited about this because what it allows us to do as developers, as product owners, as CTOs, is to see these capabilities that are possible and start to imagine what possibilities can we do? But instead of jumping on the bandwagon like we continue to do with things like, does anybody remember Flex? Can't believe I'm even saying that word. Power Builder, SOA, any of these trends that started to come up that we all just jumped on this bandwagon for. Here's an opportunity where we can back off a little bit and just be more iterative in terms of where we can actually gain that business value. And as a matter of fact, I want to turn it over to you because I think I have a great answer for you, but your products are already leveraging great business value from this by enablement.
Yeah, and so I was going to just add, I think, definitely the 30% status, we see that as well. There are two types of companies I see as there are two types. There are incumbents and there are some AI first companies, right? We call ourselves an AI first company. We were founded but as an AI company. The AI first companies actually do not know how to run successful POCs. They're pretty new on the block. They haven't been around. They haven't done consulting SaaS companies have professional services teams. They go in, they actually do a successful onboarding of folks. They kind of run a POC with milestones. The business value is already defined with the CTOs up front. And then they're kind of trying to realize that over the course of the POC. AI first companies are what I've seen in the market are having, it's kind of like a PLG model for the most part. And, developers start the evaluation process. The CTO is like, great, let's run a POC. Developers are using it, but they don't quite know the full potential of the technology because they haven't really had a good workshop with the vendor. Most of the vendors have so much demand that they don't have the bandwidth to do those workshops, and hence those POCs are failing. And so this happens with every kind of, if you look at new technology evolution in S-curve, right? We are at the growth phase of AI and kind of disruptive technology with AI. And it'll continue to happen over, I think, the course of 2025. But as things settle and people understand how to kind of get to that value point, which we are too, we've run a few unsuccessful POCs, and we're running very successful POCs. And we did the learning on the job. I've been in SaaS and I've run big professional services teams, but we still got it wrong here. So so I think that learning is happening this year, and I think next year is going to be actually that number is going to go way down. Is how I see this.
Okay, so if I can broadly summarize, you need to anchor on data. Data is what makes your AI and your application successful. If you're not going and actually understanding your customer scenario and what you're doing, you can't have a successful AI application. You can't build yet another layer on top of your application and make it a success. You really need to understand the business domain and the value. And you have to build iteratively and actually show that you can build complex applications step by step and incrementally get that business value out of your application. This is now happening in the AI space where AI app companies themselves are beginning to show value and show those capabilities. Now, we've been focusing a lot on business-to-business scenarios for AI applications. Can you think of any spectacular successes or failures of AI applications that have been made available to consumers?
Yeah, I use an AI-powered email client for better or for worse, but I've been leaning into it as a consumer. So it's definitely a B2C. And in fact, literally this morning, I decided I keep pushing myself a little bit further with it. It's been phenomenal. So last year, I was at a conference in Budapest. We rented a shared house with a bunch of speakers. We spent a week there. It was a wonderful time. And at one point, we all went off and did our own thing. And I got back to the house that we were renting. And I knew I needed to know the code for the lockbox. There's a lockbox and there's an entry code. There's a bunch of little codes I needed to know. And so I just went to my email program and I asked, hey, how do I get into the house again? I'm in Budapest. How do I get in the house again? That's literally the prompt that I gave it. And it went and found the relevant email and it gave me the direct answer to my question. And I got into the house. I didn't have to sit on the street corner for half the night. More recently, literally today, where I lent into it was I woke up this morning and I had 200 unread emails because that's just the world that we live in these days. And I said, give me a morning report on all the emails that have come in the last 24 hours. I want you to highlight everything that is that requires action. And I gave it a little prompt like that. And I told it to remember that. So now every time I say, give me my daily briefing, it's going to repeat that prompt essentially. And it gave me a nice breakdown of what came in. And I said, okay, everything classified as a promotion. Is there anything in there that I need? No. Okay. Archive all of those. It gave me action items. I said, okay, great. Reply to this email and communicate this basic set of things. And so I got a tremendous amount done just interacting with the chat interface of that application. So I thought that was a very successful application of AI in my life to do what it's supposed to do. One of my favorite quotes that I've seen was, AI should be doing tedious things for creative people, but there's too many cases right now where it's doing creative things for tedious people.
I can probably add, of course, full disclosure, I work for a professional services firm, so we have a lot of examples of how we are implementing AI for our customers. And I would say this research organization, life sciences organization, which was sitting on treasure trove of unstructured data, right? So think about a research organization that does a lot of experiments and studies on, say, animals or for drug discovery or for any other purpose. And they have this historical data that's sitting in their organization untouched, right? Unstructured data. Think about PDFs as large as thousands of pages long with embedded text, with tables, with diagrams and whatnot, right? So different types of, and of course, it's a huge challenge if you really want to refer to what study was done 20 years ago. It's really hard to access that information. And at ThoughtWorks, we actually helped our customer access the meaningful information that was logged in these unstructured PDFs. And we built a RAG-based chatbot that allowed the researchers to refer to a study that was done probably even 50 years ago and actually use that to refer back to what they were trying to do today, right? So that, in my opinion, is a fantastic use case of how AI can do the tedious job by looking at thousands and thousands of reports and build a grounded system which can actually attribute that whatever it is suggesting is actually recorded in this specific PDF, and this was the instance when this study was done. And I think that in my mind is a win, right? Like, and this bot is already in production, already helping the researchers reduce their cycle time to access the research material, to actually also expedite how the research lifecycle goes in the preclinical phase, if you know that domain for that matter, right? So that's, in my mind, is a shining example of how AI should be used and how it has been actually useful in adding business value to the organization.
Well, I can't help but give a shout out to my friend Scott Davis, who this morning showed us in one of his sessions a really good example of exactly what you're talking about. And that was the use of AI for accessibility. And it was, how many people, show of hands, actually attended Scott's session? Was it at just It was amazing. And here is a great use that I was very moved and touched by the use of AI within the device that you have in your pocket right now to enable touch, hearing, sight capabilities that we didn't have a year ago. So I think that's just a beautiful example of that. And those of you who didn't have a chance to go to a session, please, when these recordings come out, please watch it, because it's quite amazing to see another really good use case of AI within directly to the consumer.
Translation is another one. Machine translation has gotten infinitely better. I remember the early versions before Google Translate. There was Yahoo had something called Babelfish. And at first I thought it was amazing. And then I actually tried to translate something to communicate with somebody. And I got a response back in English that said, "Don't hurt yourself. Just talk to me in English." That was terrible. But what we have, the things we've accomplished with vectorization are just tremendous. And using context-rich vectors and that are language independent, that we can bring in the vector for Italian or Japanese. It's really mind-boggling how powerful this is.
Yeah, so on my end, like there's like the go-to-market team and the product team. So I can kind of give examples of how we use AI to scale at ZenCoder. And we're a pretty small team, but we've taken a pretty big kind of undertaking. On the product side, like we use ZenCoder to build ZenCoder. And the best example is we recently actually built 22 integrations in a course of 3 weeks. And if I look at that work, that body of work, we did the same body of work at my previous company, Reich. It took us 6 months to kind of do like 4 integrations. And like we were able to do 1 integration in 2 weeks and then replicate that to another like 20 more with using ZenCoder. And now we're going to 100. And we use like an iPaaS vendor in our previous workplace and kind of paid a couple of $1 million for that iPaaS thing. And now we can actually do it with ZenCoder. So that's one example on the product side. On the go-to-market side, I'm super proud of our marketing team, team of actually 3 people. And essentially, we have scaled our kind of marketing engine to the levels of what Reich was. And Reich was a team of 100 marketers. And we're able to do that with 3 marketers, right? So that's amazing because, we do all starting from like lead generation to lead scoring, which lead scoring itself is a 5 to 10% ML kind of job because, it's kind of a very involved kind of machine learning algorithm to identify the high scored leads, which, 90% would cover, or 5% of the leads would cover 90% of your revenue. And so we've kind of deployed those machine learning models and kind of AI models with Gen AI models, and it has been a huge game changer to kind of scale marketing. So yeah, that's my personal experience. Like if, again, human in the loop is required, you cannot just autonomously do this stuff, but having the right expertise with AI is just like game changing. You can actually 10x, 50x, 100x your kind of, the workforce.
Yeah, just to add, I want to take a step back, right? Instead of talking about very specific use cases, Stephen, if I want to, just talk about how do you think about where generative AI, for that matter, I mean, AI has been around for decades, but specifically generative AI, where does it really make sense, right? What are some of those use cases where you should think about using it, not as a silver bullet, as he spoke about earlier? I think there are 3 specific things that I want to highlight here. First, going back to what I said earlier, if your organization has a solid data and AI ecosystem, that means you have AI-ready data, right? Which can fuel your AI. You should probably think of generative AI use cases. Second, you should look at what's the tolerance of hallucination that you have for your given use case, right? Use cases where the tolerance of hallucination is high, right? Which are more creative contexts. Like think of drug discovery for that example, right? Here, scientists are looking for more novel compounds. And in this case, where the tolerance for hallucination at this level of the drug discovery process is really, really high, so it makes sense to use generative AI because your tolerance for hallucination is really high. But if your tolerance for hallucination is really low, then probably Gen AI is not the right technology for you. And the third one is, how do you evaluate what's the regulatory impact of this tech for your industry, right? So if you have these three factors aligned and it aligns with your business strategy, that's when you should start thinking about how to leverage Gen AI for solving that specific problem, right? So I just wanted to generalize and give people some idea on how to think about some of these factors.
It's really good framework to how you think about it. And we covered a bunch of use cases where Gen AI is a good application. It works really well, but I think you highlighted one of the big issues when people try to implement this on real world projects, which is the hallucinations. And it's real and it's a huge problem when you try to use Gen AI models and you try to build systems. If you come to my talk tomorrow, I can't be the only one to plug your talk.
Got to do a plug.
It will be the audience versus the Gen AI model, and the Gen AI model will hallucinate really badly by design. But when you have a system and you're trying to get hallucinations out of it, how do you put the right guardrails in place? How do you build the right test cases? How do you actually deal with this to build a productive system?
So,
Go
ahead.
Well,
While they're arguing,
Fine,
while they're arguing,
you're going to start.
I'll let you figure it out. The first thing we have to realize is hallucinations in these models. This is a feature, not a bug. The generative point, they're generating things that if all of these things we're doing was just giving you the same answer every single time, then what we were doing is we were spending billions of dollars in energy. We are ravaging our planet for essentially a database. And there's not a lot of value in that. So the hallucination thing, we have to realize that the creative component, I'm saying, using the term creative very loosely, but that is a feature of these models. And I think that gets back to fitness for purpose, that a lot of times that generative capability is exactly what we want. But I would contend that most organizations, the vast majority of organizations, don't have AI-ready data. We might have good data, but it's just data. And what we should probably be investing in is structuring that and turning that data into information, turning that information into knowledge, even if it's structured. We think of data as what's in the database and information as what's in the PDFs. But we can absolutely, we've been able to do this for decades, represent our structured data as information. We've been able to, for decades, represent our structured data as structured knowledge. And sure, all these interesting standards came to be decades ago before generative AI, but it's time to start paying attention to these things because it's the same problem that's been around for as long as computers have been around, and that is the GIGO principle: garbage in, garbage out. And so I really think we should be that's a really key component. Like RAG is a good step in the right direction, but for our structured data as well, we need that in-band metadata. We need context. We need semantics in that data, and we've ignored those standards for far too long. These are standards like JSON LD. These are standards surrounding things like knowledge graphs. This is where we're putting much more useful context into the data that we're feeding to these models, and we're going to get a much more constrained response back out.
Well, so I want to come full circle back to our first question because can you imagine if your spreadsheet hallucinated? I mean, the world would be over. I mean, because we all use spreadsheets. Why? Because it's deterministic. Pablo Picasso once said, computers are useless because all they give you is a solution. And what he was really talking about in this quote was that these are two separate things. What we're talking about here, and true, get on the topic of guardrails, but we're expecting our AI to be deterministic, and it is not. It is a non-deterministic system. And if we want our systems to epically fail in a big way, then we can make the assumption that we can turn Gen AI into a deterministic system. That is a big mistake. The other thing that Pablo Picasso was talking about is he wanted questions. Venkat talked about this in his keynote this morning, that the usefulness of non-deterministic hallucinating systems is like if we are in a room together whiteboarding and brainstorming for a big problem we have. That's when I want all of you in the room with me, because I've got an approach and I've got some thoughts about how we can solve this really hard problem, but I don't have all of the thoughts. That's why I need all of you to be in that brainstorming session. And that is a really good use of Gen AI in that regard. So I actually think that the hallucinations help us in that regard. Now, guardrails can certainly be used to trim down to say, well, I don't really want you to say that. That's PII information, or we can trim this, or I try to identify hallucinations. Absolutely. It's one tool, it's one attempt to temper down some of the non-deterministic behavior of AI right now. I'll say right now in quotes.
I want to just say, sort of slight tangent from what Mark mentioned. I believe that if we really want to build production-grade Gen AI-based systems, hallucination is a real problem to solve, right? Although in creative context, it can be, a useful thing, as you mentioned, but it's a real problem to solve. It's a real challenge. And I can say that in order to solve hallucination as a problem, we don't have to make our AI systems deterministic, because non-determinism, being stochastic, is their property, right? That's how they are by design. So what we have to think about is, how do we use their existing properties and build our testing strategies around that ecosystem, right? For example, there are several things that come here, right? There are benchmarks, right? I'm sure all of you understand that when model creators release models, they release their benchmarks on what's the comparison with, say, some sort of model that they're already referring to, right? What's the comparison on the various benchmarks that get, it's like a leaderboard for models, right? I'm sure everybody understands that. But then for a production grade system to solve hallucination, you need to think about your evaluation strategy, right? What's going to be, how are you going to do the evals for your system? Because you are using a SOTA model, right? State-of-the-art model. But then that has a lot of capabilities, right? It is like a master of many, many trades. But then when you try to use that model for a very specific use case for your problem statement, you have to evaluate that within the guardrails of your organization, within the guardrails of your business, so that your customers, your investors can trust what you're building, right? Like the example that I was giving was from Cursor. I'm sure a lot of you here know about Cursor, right? Their email support agent called Sam, named like a human, made up a policy at runtime which never existed, because they're using that, AI-based email support system as a first level of defense for any support emails that come into their kitty. And that, in my opinion, is a huge challenge, because it just hallucinated. And what is the harm it did? It created a reputational hazard for the company, right? People started threatening that we are going to cancel our subscription because it made up a policy that never existed. And that policy was that if you're using Cursor across multiple devices, you will need different licenses. That's like crap shit, right? You don't need different licenses for. So hallucination is a real problem to solve, and without having a proper evaluation strategy, without having a proper testing strategy on how you test your systems and how you continuously test your systems, I think that's where the part of observability comes in, right? You need to continuously monitor your production track. What sort of queries are being asked by your users? What sort of data is coming and flowing into your system? And then you have to constantly keep evolving your test cases, your evals, so that your system and your test bed reflects how your system is being used by the actual users, right? So there is a lot of effort that goes into actually removing or suppressing the hallucination and protecting your system from such hazardous failures.
Okay, I'm going to pass over to Archie, because I think you're the person who actually is building systems and putting guardrails in place. And what's your take on this?
So not so much guardrails, but we solved the problem for hallucinations. Not completely solved it, of course, but we reduced the number of hallucinations in code. Mm-hmm. That was the number one problem we saw last year as we kind of launched the product. There are two things we did, right? One is context. So context is so important. I just cannot kind of mention how important it is, but it is very important. It is actually So what we call internally is we say like context is a Goldilocks problem, where essentially you cannot give the LLMs too much or too little. You have to give them the right amount of context. So if you have a 1 million, 10 million, 100 million token window, whatever, it doesn't actually improve your quality of code generation. What improves your code generation is what context you're providing for that kind of query the user has asked to the LLMs. And on top of that, that reduces the hallucinations, does not eliminate it. You could actually do some agentic kind of repair. We do that to actually reduce hallucinations after we provide the right context. So oftentimes in a single user request, and I know probably Cursor does it as well, but different varies of degrees and how we kind of implement it, is we, in a single user request, we will often call LLMs hundreds of times to actually get the right query to the user to eliminate a lot of the hallucinations. And so we've been very successful with that strategy, and that has been one of the bigger differentiators. And so I think in regards to code, there are vendors that are already addressing the spot problem. In regards to other kind of lines of businesses, industries, I think you have to kind of evaluate like your test beds and whatnot and kind of figure out what the right strategy would be. But the hallucination problem in code is being addressed as we speak. So that's the number one problem we kind of went after. The last straw I'll say is like tools is so important. Just like for humans, we learn by like, so if you think about how I learned, like when I was engineering, I used to kind of write stuff to remember with pen and paper and stuff, right? And so that's a tool. And for AI as well, as you increase the tools, and which a lot of these agentic models are doing, you get much better results. And the last stretch is when you're able to do like end-to-end testing in code. I think when that comes out, all of us are working on, then you can actually complete the kind of SDLC loop, right, where you can go from code to unit testing to integration and end-to-end, and the agent will be semi-autonomous. Still human in the loop is required, but that kind of reduces the hallucinations even further. Nobody is doing that complete loop yet, but working on it.
Okay, so I think like you raised a really important topic, and something which if you came to GIDS 1 year ago, nobody was talking about agents. But now the whole industry has moved to AI models and agents which are reasoning and agents which are talking to agents. What's the definition of an agent?
Yeah, so I kind of define it as 3 things. One is it has planning, it has reasoning, and it has tools. So anything that can kind of do that in sequence. And of course, you're kind of trying to solve for a workflow. That's my simple definition. Of course, there's a lot of debate around that.
For me, the word autonomous is the key when we are talking about agents. Agent is an autonomous entity or a software system which can sense its environment and then take decisions on its own, plan on its own, and go about involving the human when it's the right time. But autonomous is the key word in my opinion, right? Rest of the things are probably workflows, but autonomy is the key part here, that I decide in what order, what tool to use, in what order to use, and that autonomy is what defines an agent for me.
Yeah, and I would concur. I've seen 2 definitions of agents so far, and they both drive me crazy. I like this one, and I usually adopt the agent as being autonomous. And however, I've also seen some use of agentic AI from a modularity standpoint as well, partitioning very specific tasks to specific agents to be able to work in concert with one another. Not necessarily autonomous, not necessarily making their own decisions without any guidance, but it is also a definition I don't particularly like or agree with, but I see some usefulness of it. But I think this is an important question because it just seems like it was yesterday, all of a sudden, we started talking about agents and agentic mesh and agentic AI. And this happened so fast. I think we're lost on a definition. I think this is a very important question to either start renaming some of these things, different from agents, or coming to a consensus about what an agent actually is. We'll be, shameless plug, we'll be seeing the use of agents in agentic AI on Thursday morning. You already did a talk on agents, yes.
I think if we're shameless plugging, I'm giving a talk of the hypermedia in the age of AI, the future of AI agentic systems. There's a great quote. I'm trying to find it. I'm not finding it, but I loved reading this. He said that when anybody selling a product refers to agents, they're almost always being deliberately deceitful. They're trying to over-prescribe capabilities. And he said, if you have a chatbot that can do some things with a database, that's a chatbot. And he defines agents as being able to complete tasks without interaction. They're making decisions and doing things without you having to tell them. I think another great example is, who remembers the Rabbit R1, which was supposed to be the first AI agentic system? Yeah, and it was a spectacular failure because what it was ultimately doing behind the scenes, under all of it, it was just a bunch of hard-coded playwright scripts. And I think that's a really key thing, that we've ignored large-scale interoperability to our peril, and now our chickens are coming home to roost. In the same way that we have ignored accessibility in a lot of our software to our peril, and now in this age of AI, our chickens are coming home to roost. We're starting to realize, oh, these things matter. And I think that's, if we're even going to entertain conversations of these things, that this idea that these agents are going to go and not just follow predefined scripts like the original Rabbit R1 was doing, but actually discovering new tools and interacting with new tools as a result of the planning process, then what that means is we as engineers really need to start investing in large scale, and by large scale, I mean web scale interoperability. These are solved problems that we've ignored, and I don't think we can continue to ignore the solutions.
Okay, so I want everybody in the audience to start queuing up questions and things which they want the panel to answer. We're going to do a lightning round of questions from the audience, but before that, I'm going to give my own question to all of you, and you get 1 minute to answer each. You can all have your own opinion. You can agree or you can disagree with each other, and I'm actually going to pick on something you said earlier, Michael, which was that AI has the potential to destroy the planet because it's consuming a lot of resources. Now, here's the question. Is AI good for the economy or good for the environment because it's potentially going to give us tools to help save the environment, or is it harmful because of the resource consumption? All right, who wants to go first?
Who remembers the paperclip scene from author Philip K. Dick? This is in 1955, and this was one of the first, I think it was Autotech was the book, and this was a case where AI was asked to create the best and most effective and efficient paperclip company in the world. And anybody who's read that book knows it destroyed the world. And it didn't ignore efficiency, but it tried to be too efficient. And so I can't help but think of the paperclip story, which has been repeated several times with many authors.
Okay, so the world's going to end.
World's going to end.
Yeah, I think it benefits. I think it kind of benefits humanity and whatnot, but you have to use it with. My answer would be very different 6 months ago. It'd be like, okay, it's not a problem. It's kind of fine. We're not using as much resources, but now it's kind of like getting up there, right? Like if you look at all these thinking models and whatnot, they are utilizing a lot. But also Moore's law is going to kick off in AI. I don't know what that looks like in terms of, it is pretty fast, actually, fast moving. And so with that kicking off, we are at a very early stage of a technology, again, going back to that S-curve. And there will be sustaining innovations, I believe. I don't know what they will be. which will get us to the right place.
So I would characterize you're a technology optimist.
Yeah.
Vanya?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you ask purely in terms of the environmental impact, I think it's humongous, right? I mean, one single query to ChatGPT takes about the same amount of electricity that can power a light bulb for 20 minutes. That's a lot, right? And if you just extrapolate it in terms of how do you use energy for training, I think there are some numbers. For GPT 3.5, for training that on 175 billion parameters, it took about 1,287 megawatt hour of energy. That's equivalent to, from an American household perspective, 120 years of power. That's a lot, right? That's really, really a lot. But having said that, as I understand, as a technologist, as somebody who really cares for how sustainability is panning out in this space, I can say that there are now also advancements about using AI responsibility, right? There are advancements on how to build safety in these systems, how to think about sustainability. And there are going to be regulations across geographies which can sort of counter these points, right? And I would say model to solve a simple problem. So if you are in a very specific context, specific use case, you can use a small language model that can considerably reduce your energy footprint. So I think it's all about becoming responsible in building technology and using technology. That's how we had to think. Like, I'm a pessimist technologist, so we have to think about how do we really optimize and for sustainability as well.
Yeah, but then there are things we can do or society can do to reduce the impact. Yeah. Okay, excellent. And you get the last word.
I definitely want to pick on something you said. You invoked Moore's law. I have two things that I want to say to respond to that. The first thing is we've already hit the ceiling of Moore's law. Moore's law was originally that the density of transistors was going to double every 18 months. That's not happening anymore. But the more important thing is that Moore's law applies to hardware and not software. And we can't forget that. One of the things that we've got to be guarded about is magical thinking in AI. That, well, that's okay because eventually it's going to get so good that it's super intelligent and it's actually going to solve all of our problems. We can't wait for a technological rapture and everything is suddenly going to be okay, because that's not really the trajectory that we're on with this technology. I think the energy cost, whether you care about the environmental cost or not, is enormous, and we're already reaching the capacity of the entire planet's power generation. Like, new data center contracts are being canceled right now because it's going to take 10 years to be able to get enough power capacity to keep going with all of this. The other thing that we can't forget is that all of this is being heavily subsidized, that we are all burning tens of millions of dollars of VC money in just saying please and thank you to AI models. Like, this is not sustainable. And we don't have a plan to keep this going.
Okay. So we're going to burn down the planet.
Well, no, because we can't increase our power generation. What's going to happen is we're all going to have to be energy conservative at home, just so the mega data centers can keep.
So we got a quota of how many queries, ChatGPT queries can run per day.
It's going to be, there's some kind of government control.
Does your Daily Mail summary count to that quota?
It does. And I'm not paying nearly enough for the amount of compute that I'm using. I know that for a fact.
Okay, so we want to get to some audience questions. Raise your hand. We have a couple mic runners in the audience. Please ask your question quickly, and then one of these folks will answer it within a minute or less. Go ahead.
I have the mic. I'm not a mic runner. I can be one. There was a comment on LinkedIn today about code that's writing code, and code that's writing code that's embedded in CPUs and GPUs. I didn't hear any of you comment on that, given that this is real world systems, especially going into autonomous weapon systems. Can you talk about that? Is that science fiction or is that reality?
Wow. The first thing I can think of is one of my favorite books in AI, which is a book by Douglas Preston called The Kraken. And this was an AI called Dorothy that was able to generate its own code. and evolve. When I read that back about 10, 12 years ago, I got so fascinated in code that could write its own code that I wished I was 20 or 30 years younger, because I would have devoted 100% of my job to that. I think that's really cool stuff. I'm still waiting for that to happen. The question is, how effective will it be? Because we are in a tsunami right now of the most horrible amount of data LLMs is processing. Think about 3 years ago, the amount of data LLMs was churning. What's happened in the past 3 years? We're generating query after query after prompt, and all of those bad results are just being fed straight into the LLM. So I panicked a little bit, but I'm also extremely intrigued. I do not think that that is science fiction. I think we will eventually, fairly soon, get to the point where code can actually start generating its own code.
Okay. Great question.
Yeah.
Great response. Let's.
Can I add to that? Sorry.
Yes,
Just
but only this once.
one small thing, right? I think that's definitely not science fiction. I mean, if I relate back to something that happened in the history, right? When compilers came, people had the same reaction. Oh, are you going to write in a high-level programming language? We are machine language programmers, so we write closer to the machine. And I really think that in the future, maybe AI can generate code and regenerate it every time. And so it can, rebuild its own code, and we don't have to sort of get in it. And probably the way we know code today, the way we look at code today, it's going to change entirely, right? That frame is going to shift from how we think about software today to probably a new paradigm altogether. So it's definitely not science fiction. I think it's all evolving at a very fast pace. Watch out for it.
Watch out. All right.
Okay.
Next.
Okay, I do have Mike here. This side, this here. Yep. So one question here. AI has been in the world since long, right? I mean, 1960s and all this and foundation things. It kicked off after ChatGPT came, and then after that, it's like large language models. And now, entire world, what it's talking about is on LLM. Like maybe Cursor or Windsurf or anything. It's about language. But AI is not just language. There are so many world models are also there, which is not clicked yet. So do you think any chances, like, recently Jan LeCun also talked about some of the world models, which is not clicked yet. So I think that may also need data or something, but what are your views about any other kind of AIs? Because right now what we see is like just large language models, codes, just language, not any other kind of models.
Well, I think the closest world model is Tesla, right? Like if you look at how they are kind of doing autonomy and even, Waymo, for example. And if you go to SF, you can kind of take the Waymos and they're pretty fun to ride in. But like those are world models, right? They're kind of taking vision. There's no like language, but they're taking vision. They're taking, a bunch of kind of surrounding the kind of visuals and kind of making sense out of it, right? So it's already there in different. I think Google's already developing it for other applications and even in medical field. I've heard some really unique use cases. But yeah, it's not talked upon much because, of course, kind of LLMs have overtaken. It's more kind of B2C applications, if you will, and that's probably why they're kind of talking about it. Like I think Tesla, Waymo are kind of those world models in my mind, at least.
Okay. Excellent. And we have time.
Mine is next question.
Yeah, time for two more questions.
I'm here.
Yeah.
We talked about hallucination, great panel, great discussion. What are your thoughts on, AI helping criminals or let's say government spies, citizens, what do you want to comment on that?
That is a very interesting question. This is one of the reasons I'm pessimistic about AI in general. Are you familiar with the Red Queen dilemma? It is a concept in evolutionary biology that as the predator evolves to be a more effective predator, the prey must evolve to be more elusive prey. And what happens is you end up just going faster and faster and faster and faster and faster just to stay exactly where you are. And so as we get more capabilities for bad actors to do bad things with AI, we're spending more and more compute just trying to counter that. Like there are so many success stories right now. People are saying, oh, well, we used AI to block 1 million threats in the last hour. And how many of those threats were AI generated in the first place?
Okay, great answer. And last question.
Just one question. So any of
Okay.
you have, so couple of months before I watched a movie, The Creator is based on AI. So just wanted to know if anyone of you have watched that movie or what's your view. If not, I'll recommend just watch.
The creator?
Creator.
The creator. I'm going to find it. I haven't seen it.
Okay,
Haven't seen it.
that's an excellent
Thank you for the
review.
suggestion, though.
Recommendation. And
Yeah.
let's take one more question. I'm going to try really hard to ask a question. Go ahead.
I was hoping to ask something about the intersection of because we're talking about energy consumption and then the rise of agentic systems. I'm pretty jet lagged, so I'll just try to be as eloquent as I can. But so as agentic systems, basically they run on loops, right? They run on loops of inference, which means a lot of context being exponentially increased as it passes either through its own loops or passes loops to other multi-system agents. So how do you, and you've already heard maybe rumblings where people are complaining about cursor quality dropping because they have to limit the tool use of their agents because the context windows are just getting so huge. So how do you see a world evolving where you have the increasing capability of these multi-system agents to handle all this inference, but at the same time, the cost goes up, even though the cost per token goes down, the sheer amount of inference from these loops drives the quantity of inference sky high.
I think there's a lot of development that's happening in that space. I know a lot of people might not like MCP, but all the effort in this space to sort of give the right context and integrate with your own enterprise ecosystem, I think that's something that we should definitely look at. A very simple example of this is how now right in your IDE, you can talk to your Jira or your Atlassian suite to get information with the help of an MCP integration, right? So that's something that's really useful. So giving the right context, I think Archie spoke about that, and giving the right amount of context. So I think all of these innovations and the interoperability standards that are coming in this space, in my opinion, are going to make these systems better, more optimized, and not only just control the cost, but also continuously improve on the performance angle as well.
Okay, so I want to.
Can we have one last question? Please,
No.
please.
All right, last question. Go ahead.
Vanya, you talked about hallucinations of AI, right? So, in my opinion, there are two type of hallucinations, right? Suppose, as you told about cursor, they are agent hallucinated. So, there is a hallucination in which AI generate the response out of its knowledge base, right? And there is a type of hallucination in which the AI generate response, which is something new. So, how do you prevent the first type of hallucination? Like I'm providing a knowledge base and I don't want it to provide anything outside of that. So how do you do that?
Just mentioned that, right? That you curate or ground your system. And that's where I think retriever augmented generation fits really well, because that's the whole point, that you will be able to reduce the hallucination of any large model by grounding it in your enterprise data and making sure that you have the right feedback loops, which gives you feedback on what sort of documents were fetched, and you can have some handle on monitoring the recall, the precision of what documents are being fetched, and how they sort of increase the coherence and relevance of the answer that gets generated. So I think RAG, in my opinion, is a good way to ground your AI systems in your enterprise data so that we can remove the hallucinations in enterprise use cases.
So suppose if I take an example, right? I have provided an article in knowledge base. It says Google has 5 services. Let's take an example, right? Maps, YouTube, Drive, and such on. So if I ask the agent, can I watch videos on YouTube? The agent provides the answer, but I have not provided the data about YouTube, what YouTube is, why it is a platform for watching videos. So how do I prevent that?
Let's talk offline.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for all the great questions. Now, just to summarize, I think that the purpose of coming here and having this panel was for us to understand as engineers and people building software, how we can be more effective to build really good production systems, to ground it in data, to build applications which solve real use cases, to build it iteratively, and to take advantage of some of the latest advances in AI that we've been talking about, like agentic models, using MCP retrievers, which I think we have mixed opinions on, and building systems which actually solve real business problems. So I want to thank all of our panelists who brought a lot of wisdom, took a lot of time to answer questions, to work through things. Give them a round of applause. And I also want to thank the GIDS attendees for coming to the final session of the day. It's been a long day. It's been a lot of information absorption. So thank you so much for coming today. And we hope to see you at the rest of the conference.